Hey all, this is Brett in post, and I just had a couple quick housekeeping items for this episode. If you remember from the last one, we went on a little longer than we thought we were going to, so I split this episode up into two. So, as you know by the title, this episode is going to be all about the lore and story of the DLC for Elden Ring, as well as tying it into the main game, and kind of storyboarding our ideas, our theories, some of the things that we've been thinking about. And this is another really fun one. I had a lot of fun doing this one. The biggest housekeeping item is that there is going to be major spoilers in this episode, if that wasn't entirely obvious. We're going to be talking about all of the DLC. We're going to be talking about the bosses, the story, everything related to it. So if you haven't played the DLC yet, please go ahead and play it. If you haven't finished the main game, what are you waiting for? We're going to spoil everything. The second housekeeping item that I have is that we do have merch available for the podcast now. I'm not going to plug it too much, but I just want to plug it this week as well. There are 3 different designs. You can find all of the information on my social media pages. So on Instagram is the main one that I use. If you have any questions, please reach out. If you want to grab something, I would really appreciate it. It just helps support the show. It helps me do a little bit more with the show, as well as just covering general costs. It really helps me out. I really appreciate all the support. And please go and support the Overthinking Games podcast, where Seth is from. They have a lot of fun over there. Their episodes are a lot of fun. I really love that podcast. So again, very thankful to Seth for hopping on this one with me. And with that being said, let's just get into the episode. So enjoy.
Oh, why do you gotta put it like that?
So, and we're gonna quickly swerve away from that because I hate it. So, in talking about Meter, Mother of Fingers, however you decide you want to pronounce it, I thought that was it's kind of a good segue into lore if you're interested in talking about that at the moment.
Yeah.
Because even just that storyline that is honestly pretty missable. It's just it's this random church in the middle of nowhere that's kind of hard to get to. And then it's a deep, dark room that I didn't even see the guy when I first went in there. I almost missed that entirely. And that's probably because I am space brained when I'm playing these games. I just kind of look at the surroundings and go, cool things everywhere. And I just kind of miss everything. But for being kind of a side story and a totally optional boss, totally optional NPC quest, it's actually very important to the story of Elden Ring. And I think it's actually one of I think maybe the most important things that they've written into the lore of the game to flesh everything out.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree. I was definitely drawn to that area because I was doing an int build and, just pattern recognition, right? You had Manus Celestia in the base game where you got the Moonlight Greatsword. So I was oh, this is probably some int area. And then there was some spells you could buy. So I was oh, cool. This is the int storyline. So I was sort of inclined to follow through with that area and explore it a ton. But yeah, I ended up being really surprised just at how significant that character was, because it really felt like he was dropping some, like you said, some pretty significant things for the overall story of Elden Ring.
Yeah, it puts it into perspective, why everything is the way it is, and why Marika's reign is kind of what it is, why the greater will has abandoned everything, and why that's happened. It's I think it's really interesting because I had never really thought about it. The Golden Order, I'm not going to lie, kind of confuses me because it's just kind of what is it exactly? What is the Golden Order? What exactly is it trying to accomplish? It's trying to uphold the greater will, but what is the greater will? What does it want? And then it turns out the greater will has abandoned the lands between and everything. And it's all been left so Meter, Mother of Fingers. So from its remembrance, you learn that it was the first star that basically, or the first comet that landed there. And then, assumedly, the second was the Elden Beast. Because we also know that came down in a shooting star somehow. So it's Meter, Mother of Fingers came down in a shooting star, basically established the greater will in this place, the whole religion with the 2 fingers, the 3 fingers, all of the fingers. And then, everything spirals from there. It's that's I wasn't expecting that storyline to be literally the origins of the entire religion of the world, or the entire order of the world.
Yeah, there's just like this, and this is where there's just like so much to dive into for like different stuff to talk about. And this is, I guess, just a general Elden Ring thing, because you had mentioned the Golden Order. One of the things I like truly love about Elden Ring and the story and the ideas is this sort of question about the Elden Ring itself, and the fact that it is seemingly like both a physical thing, like the Elden Ring is something that you can go like literally look at in the game.
Yeah.
But it's also a conceptual idea. There's like the concept of the Elden Ring, but then there's also like the physical manifestation of the Elden Ring, which is like the Elden Beast.
Yeah.
Like they just continue to like play around with these ideas, or even like the Golden Order, like a literal thing. It's both like Marika and Radagon representing one gold, one order. But then it's also the like law of the land. It's like the kingdom that they rule in. So like that physical but also like metaphorical or like conceptual idea that the game plays around with, just for me, I was like, oh, it's the coolest thing. The idea that like the rune of death is like a physical thing. And when it says like Marika plucked the rune of death out of the Elden Ring
and then sealed it away, and then people don't die anymore. It's like,
right,
it's just wild that can happen. Like,
right. The idea that like the rune of death is a physical part of a physical Elden Ring, but it also made it so that like people can't die anymore. And it's, did she physically pluck it out, or did she like conceptually pluck it out?
Yeah.
And then it just like physically manifests somewhere else. Like,
yeah, is it like plucking toppings off a pizza, or is it like trying to get fruit out of a blender, like out of a smoothie? You know, like how hard is it to pluck something out of the Elden Ring?
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Right, like,
you know,
can you just are you taking pepperoni off the pizza, or are you trying to like get your banana back out of your smoothie? Yeah.
Oh man, I wanted this to be a strawberry smoothie. Why'd I put banana in there? Well, better just take it out. Yeah, and it's so interesting because like I feel like the DLC kind of, I don't know, it adds more questions, but it also answers like a ton. Like it's like
totally,
it kind of like sets the rules for the land and kind of explains where it came from, why it is. And then furthermore, it explains why like everything is so stale, and it's because the Greater Will abandoned everything, and everything is like Meter, Mother of Fingers, Marika, everyone is operating off of instructions that were given for order who knows how long ago.
Yeah, so actually, I want to read that line because Count Ymir gives that line. So this is why we were talking about this. Count Ymir gives that line as part of the quest line, right? So after you ring the third bell, he says, do you recall what I said? That Marika and the fingers that guided her were unsound from the start. Well, the truth lies deeper still. It is their mother who is damaged and unhinged. The fingers are but unripe children, victims in their own right. We all need a mother, do we not? A new mother, a true mother, who will not give birth to further malady.
Which is super interesting, and it like that alone sets up Miquella's intention and like what Miquella is doing, and because Miquella is just trying to like make everything right and start a new order that isn't corrupt and isn't starting from corruption.
Now I do want to make one more mention of thing.
Go ahead.
Which is just that because I've got a little bit of a beef here, specifically with our friend here, Count Ymir, because after you defeat Jolin, the like Black Knight that's with him, Ymir says, "My shining star, grant me a mother's strength. Look here at my fingers. I will be the true mother, and I will be the only mother."
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like he was trying to like usurp almost, or like become.
Yes.
Like,
and to me, this is where I feel like people aren't talking about this enough. I don't think Count Ymir is a trustworthy source. Because
why would you say that?
To me, I think he has some sort of bias against Mother of Fingers. He wants to take the place of her to be the new Mother of Fingers. He says, a new mother, a true mother who will not give birth to further malady. And then his line later is, I will be the true mother.
You know what? And that's really interesting because actually, so the first time you meet him, his last line is like, oh, like, be careful where you walk. You don't want to like step on the boy or whatever it is, which is he has like one of those little fingers as a baby, right?
Yeah.
And then if you rest at the bonfire or at the site of grace, I said bonfire, same thing. If you rest at the site of grace and then you go back to him, he's like talking to the finger.
He's like petting one.
And he's like, and I don't remember exactly what the line was, but he's like, don't worry, that tangled mess can't hurt you anymore. Or he says, I want to say he says something about like that tangled mess can't hurt you anymore. And it just kind of clued into me that like he's probably talking about Meter, like the mother of fingers. Yeah. And like he was probably down there trying to figure out like doing something, whatever. And like he found the little baby hand and he's like trying to like, he saw that maybe it was being abused or maybe it was like misguided or something from the instructions from Meter. He's trying to be its mother and like maybe he saw that it was being mistreated and that's why he wants to like uproot the system. Is I don't know, like he's definitely got some weird like maternal instincts going on, which is kind of confusing.
Apparently during his second fight, and I don't remember seeing this, or maybe it's from the equipment that he drops. No, during his second fight he can like summon the finger creepers, but it looks like he's got like a set of fingers like coming out of his chest.
Oh, interesting. I did not even get that. I think I killed him too quick.
I think I killed him too quick too. I just saw somebody talk about that. But again, so people have been using his dialogue here to, because you ask about the nature of the world and he's like, Meter is broken, Meter is unhinged and damaged. But I'm like, he wants to take the position of that. He knows that we have the ability to kill Meter.
So yeah, he's biased. He wants us to. So of course he's going to tell us whatever we want to hear to go and murder this thing.
Right. So I don't know if I like fully buy everything he's saying. I still think he makes good points though about the greater will, because he talks about the greater will in terms of like, he says that before the conceits, the hypocrisy of the world built upon the Erdtree, follies of men, bitter suffering. The answer, sadly, is clear. There was never any hope. They were each of them defective, unhinged from the start. America herself and the fingers that guided her. And this is what troubles me. No matter our efforts, if the roots are rotten, then we have little recourse. So, like, to me, I think at least a little bit of what he's saying is, I think, true.
There's definitely something. Well, like, yeah, he's got a basis. Like, no matter how much bias he has, there's like something to what he's saying. Yeah, right. But like maybe you're right. Maybe he is kind of an unreliable narrator. Like he's definitely has some sort of selfish ambition that he's trying to get towards.
But yeah, I think I do subscribe to the idea overall that like Greater Will's out.
Yeah.
Has abandoned the lands between. I know I mentioned this in our notes before starting, I think at least. There's this idea that like maybe the Greater Will isn't really like an entity at all. The Greater Will could just be like the Big Bang, like the creation event of the universe.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And so, like, it sort of created everything, sent it there.
That would make sense why they say, like, it sent, like, Meter down in, like, a comet or, like, a star, like, a shooting... I think it says that they fell in, like, a shooting star.
Yeah, Meter
it's, like, all of the outer beings, so it's just kind of like, oh, that actually makes kind of sense, because if it was kind of the Big Bang, then, I mean, yeah, Big Bang sends shrapnel, I guess.
Sure.
That's actually interesting, yeah.
It would then maybe be like why Meter hasn't heard anything from the Greater Will, because it's not really like a thing that can.
It's a concept. It's not an actual thing that they can commune with. It's just like it's what brought them into being.
Yeah, but see, this is where I go back and forth for a lot of ideas, because like there's something to be said about that, but then like we also know that there seem to be like beings of higher power in the Elden Ring universe. There's like the Formless Mother, which like the Mugwin dynasty follows.
I mean, there's like the fire gods. There's the outer god. Gods do exist. I mean, like Marika is a god. Like it's like gods and higher powers do exist.
So,
but I guess where did they come from? Like,
yeah. I mean, you can loop yourself back around on that, but. So, and that's where I sort of run into troubles, is it feels like the idea being that, like the Greater Will is just like the Big Bang. it's like a sci-fi concept. It's not really like a fantasy concept.
Yeah.
Like, it seems out of genre, but like it works at the same time. It's just like we don't have enough information to really dive into it.
Yeah, and I didn't think that I would spend this much talking about Meter and the Fingers and Emir. It's like, yeah, it's interesting. And you're right. Like, we're never going to have all the information that we need to actually put the pieces together. Yeah. Like, as far as I know, this is the one and only DLC. And like, we're not getting any more. It's like, there's nothing more. We're not getting anything unless we get like supplementary content. But who knows if and when that'll ever happen, or if it's even going to be related to what we're talking about.
In FromSoft fashion, it will not be.
No. And then there's the other thing that I thought was interesting that you brought up was, you didn't bring it up now, is in our notes I'm looking at, was the Shaman Village. Because, and so I thought this was interesting because it's one of those like things that you can miss very easily. Like, it's like, I feel like I missed something in the Shaman Village because like you go there, you get the minor Erdtree spell, which is in itself very like telling of Marika, her intentions, and kind of like her upbringing. You learn that Marika came from the Shaman Village, and that like the entire reason she is who she is and everything was because of the horn scent and what happened at the Shaman Village. So it's like, it's a very, very important location in the game that, again, you could just miss entirely.
But I like FromSoft, it just does that sometimes, which I mean, like, I like, Dark Souls 1 has like all of Ash Lake is just like
an area I didn't even see in my first playthrough. And
right, it's just out of the Great
so
Hollow.
Important. Yeah.
But I just got like Shaman Village is probably my favorite area in any Souls game.
That's interesting.
Well, because when I got to Shaman Village, you pull up and it's like quiet, and you're like, is this gonna be a boss fight? Like, what's happening here? And I remember the music starting up with the main menu music and the final boss music, but it's like, and I only know the final boss music so well is because of my rune level 1. I had to do it like over 100 times.
So many times, yeah.
But like the main menu, like final boss music comes in, but it's like most of the track is cut out. And I just remember getting there and being like, I literally stopped and I was like, this area is important. And I hopped off my horse and I was like, I'm going to walk around. Because I was like, I know this is going to be any important. Of
that. And it's probably because, again, it's been so long since I've like finished the game and like noticed any of the themes. But yeah, it's interesting that like you immediately noticed that. That's like a really cool tie-in. And I think like thematically, it's, it's appealing to the diehard fans like you who kind of know what's happening. And it's telling you through the environment that, yeah, this place is important. You're going to want to stop here. You're going to want to take a minute, take it all in.
And you know what? And for what it is too, the fact that there's 2 items there. There's a talisman too. Did you get the golden braid?
Right, there is a yeah.
Okay. So, but then picking up the minor Erdtree spell as well, and just having it like, it's got like 3 or 4 sentences in it. It's literally like 2 lines. And it's crazy because it's like the most important item description in the game.
Yep, pretty much.
It's 2 lines, so I'll just read it. Secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold without order, capital O, creates a small illusory Erdtree that continuously restores the HP of nearby allies. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well there was no one to heal. It's such a FromSoft ass item description.
It's so just like, oh, here's like everything and nothing at the same time. Like, we're going to tell you the entire story of Marika and also just give you nothing to go on at all.
It's so good.
But I think it's so interesting though, because like, again, like it does tell so much of Marika's story, and it like,
absolutely,
I had to kind of go back on it and like understand the significance of the Shaman Village to understand so many of the themes in the main game, like with the like the omens are such like a big part of the main game. They're like this shunned, vilified people. They're like vilified by the order.
Totally.
And you're wondering like, why? Like, there's not really any reason. They're just like these abhorrent, disgusting creatures. And it's like, well, it can't just be because they're ugly. Like, I mean, yeah, they are, but like, you know,
Right.
we try not to hate people based on that. There has to be some other reason. And then like you realize that it's the entire reason why that's the case is because of like Marika, her son Mesmer was sent on a crusade to kill every single Hornsent. Like it's a genocide. That's what he's there doing. That's what he's been there doing his entire life, basically. And because of that genocide, the Hornsent cursed Marika, and that's why she ended up having Moog and Morgoth.
Yeah.
And it's because of that curse is why the omens are so hated. It's because it's a reminder of Marika's childhood and how everyone was killed or like forced into jars by the Hornsent,
Right.
which is such a terrible, terrible concept. But it's just one of those things that I find so incredible because, again, it's probably, I think, the most important area in the game.
Oh,
and
I 100% agree.
It's just because of the lore implications. Like, it's because it just gives you like that much more insight into what is essentially the main antagonist, which is Marika / Radagon.
Yeah, and it's so wild. And I know we could talk about the Elden Ring timeline for a while, so we don't have to detail the timeline. But just the idea here of like what does this one spell tell us about like how things are structured, right? Like it lets us know like here, well, we learn from other sources like where the Omen curse comes from, but it sort of gives us this idea about like here's where Marika started, here's sort of where she came back to after this crusade got going. It even gives us like later insight into be like, okay, so she has these like Omen kids like as a result of the Omen curse, and so that like that might have been a contributing factor for her putting doubt into the greater will. Maybe she realized the same thing about like the fingers being defunct. Then her kid dies on the Night of Black Knives, and she says like, I couldn't even use godhood to save my children. What's the point anymore? And she shatters the Elden Ring, like,
and then is just like, hey, all the demigods, all my children, like, hey, free for all, have fun.
Like it does nothing matters. Have fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of the other things, and geez, there's so much to break down for the spell. One of the things I love is where it says only the kindness of gold without order. Because I want to segue to talking about Miquella here in a second, but
yes,
the idea that part of godhood is separating out a part of yourself. And, you know, we learn in the base game that Marika is Radagon, and you're sort of left wondering, like, what does that mean? Like, how can two people be the same person?
Yeah, and so it's actually really interesting because I was looking that up before the show because I'm like, I need to know more about this because obviously, like you said, Radagon, Marika, they're the same person. We know that. That's established fact, but it's like, were they combined into one person? Were they separate people at one point? Or were they always the same person? Like when Radagon went and married Renala, was that actually Marika wearing, you know, a dude's outfit?
So can I give you my interpretation of this?
Yes, please.
So my interpretation of this is based a little bit on the Miquella thing. So pre-DLC, I had kind of just supposed that like Marika and Radagon are this sort of like gestalt entity that can maybe just like swap genders or like swap between the two, kind of like how we see in the final fight where it's like Marika hanging and then like transforms into Radagon.
Yeah, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of,
Yeah, and I just kind of presumed that was the idea. But I think what we see in the DLC is having Saint Trina be a physical different character than Miquella, with the idea of like the Miquella crosses being the different parts of himself that he divested off. I think that Radagon is the part of Marika that she divested off in search of godhood.
Oh, interesting.
And because the minor Erdtree spell says only the kindness of gold without order. So Marika has separated the concept of order from herself. She is only gold at this point when she returns to the village to bathe it in gold. That would make sense, I think, timeline-wise, for how Radagon could go off, get married to Renala, because Marika is still in Lendel as that happens.
Right. Like, and that also kind of makes sense Yeah, that kind of makes sense of a lot of things too, because that would also make sense why like Radagon is the one who's like seemingly keeping order. Like you would assume that he is like the order portion. And then like Marika's the one who like breaks the Elden or like shatters the Elden Ring. So it's like, yeah, you kind of have these two parts of themselves, one that wants to keep the order, one that is like, nah, fuck everything. Like,
yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
So, and then clearly at some point in the story, right, they managed to like come back together. There's one thing that I'm really not sure about in all of this, which is, I don't know if I mentioned this in the notes, but this is deep in the weeds now for the Elden Ring lore. But I'm kind of curious as to where the red hair comes from.
So, and that's what I was wondering too. And that was like genuinely my biggest like why, like, because the red hair of Radagon, it is like the thing of fame.
Yes.
The way that you know that it's his like offspring or like his kid is that they have the red hair. That is like the big thing. So it's like what came first? Like if Radagon and Marika are the same person, and if Radagon was shed off of Marika, where did the red hair, like, I know it's a weird thing to fixate on, but it is such like a big thing in the lore that like, you know Radagon by his hair. Like that's his big thing.
And here's my beef. Who's the only other thing that we see in the game that has red hair?
The only other thing in the game that we see that has red hair? That's other than his children?
Yes.
I don't know.
Fire Giant.
Oh, yeah, I'd never thought about that.
So, like, I saw some crazy theories going around that, like, maybe, because we know that there was a war between the giants and...
Marika basically sent Godfrey... was it Godfrey? Godfrey, yeah. Her first husband.
Yes.
Because like she sent him on a crusade after the fire giants, because the fire giants were the ones who could like basically threaten the Erdtree.
Right. And so there's this question of like, because that's like the fell god, right? And the fire giants like worship the fell god. They've got like the face of the fell god in them. And two of Marika's children have a vision of fire. Mesmer and Melina both have this fire aspect to them.
Yeah.
Mesmer has the red hair. Melina has pinkish hair, but that could be like a red plus gold kind of thing going on. She's got like a strawberry blonde.
Well, because you have like, I mean, you have on one side, you have Mesmer, who is like basically fully, Radagon's child. It's like the milkman didn't come in there. And then you have Mikola, who is like basically a spitting image of Marika, like the full blonde. And then you kind of have the in-between, which would be Melina. Assuming that I don't even know if it was ever confirmed that like she is their kid. I think it's like very heavily assumed. Well, and then Melina says like, my mother in the Erdtree or like something like that. So I guess. Yeah.
Mesmer makes some note about like mother without truly lordship sanction and one so bereft of light. So like Mesmer is very clearly like Marika's kid, right?
Yeah.
Mesmer has a line of dialogue, or it used to be that when you killed Mesmer, or was it in his flame? Mesmer's kindling. What does his kindling say? Oh, Mesmer, much like his younger sister, bore a vision of fire.
Oh, very interesting.
So, and Melina has some line of dialogue, but...
I was going to say, because the only other, like, sister that he has is technically, like, Melania.
But, like, she's not, like, flame-related, yeah. So, there's this weird connection between, like, okay, so Mesmer has this flame. He's also got the red hair. So, but like, which would indicate that he's a child of Radagon.
You'd think so, yeah.
But that then I guess leaves this question about who his mom is, which we're presumed to assume Marika. So is he like the direct offspring of Radagon and Marika? Is that incest? How does that work?
As far as I know, yes. And like, as far as I know, Mesmer is like the oldest child.
That seems to be the case.
Because it's like, so yeah. And then there's an entire genealogy chart.
I know. I need a
like
pedigree here.
It's insane because it's not actually updated for the DLC, which is actually really frustrating. But because Radagon and Renala, they had Ranni, Rykard, and Radahn.
Okay.
Which I always forget that. I always thought that Radahn was Marika and Radagon's child, but no, Radon was
because he's got the gravity
Renala
magic.
and Radagon's child. Yeah. So that makes sense. And then Godfrey and Marika had Godwyn, Moog, and Morgott. So they had Godwyn and then the two omens. And then Marika and Radagon had Mesmer first.
Okay.
Then you can assume probably Melina. And then Millennia and Mikola are twins.
Right.
So, but it's just, there's a lot of weird timeline stuff with that, because it's like, when did all this stuff happen? We know that, it's hard to say.
That's the confusing part to me, is like, where exactly does everything track? And I would, my last point of sort of crazy theory in terms of Melina is, because she has a vision, it says, much like his younger sister bore a vision of fire, right? And so we're kind of left to presume that that's Melina. Because she also knows that she has to go to the mountaintop of the giants to find the bowl to burn the Erdtree. So, like, how would she know that that's there? And one of the ways could be if she has some sort of relation to, like, the fire giant and the fell god. And that's...
Yeah, but then that's so weird, because it's like, while that happened... this is very confusing. Or maybe, like, Radagon came off of, like, when Marika was defeating the fell god, like, maybe somehow that... Like a portion of Radagon is kind of the fell god, or...
Right. Like, it would have to be some sort of thing that's... Yeah, but this is where you get, like, into the timeline, where it's like, okay, so when did this, like, crusade against the giants happen? Because Radagon is, in theory, like, with Renala at this time, maybe?
Before that, so the crusade against the giants happened before that point, and then Radagon appeared some point during that, basically, because Radagon was like a champion of one of the battles, and that's why he was there in the first place, like at the Carrion battle, like because he was fighting against them, right? So it's like he came at some point during, which is like so confusing, and that's where it's like, if they're the same person, like Marika and Radagon, then like it's so hard to place them at the same point, because they would have to, they're in two different places, basically.
Well, and so that's why I like the idea that at least they sort of have the Mikola Saint Trina relationship, like they're literally like two separate entities that result from the same one.
Yeah. And I guess that's like, honestly, probably the greatest segue into like talking about Mikola that we'll ever get, because we can go into the weeds of like the timeline and just get confused, but like, man, there's so much that we don't know. Totally. And I'm sure that there's stuff that'll come up. I'm sure that someone will figure it out at some point exactly when all this stuff happened, but currently it's very confusing. But it's interesting, the entire point of like Mikola divesting, because Saint Trina is specifically Mikola divesting his love. And the entire reason for that is because, so Mikola is looking to basically create a new order. Mikola wants to become a god. That's the entire premise of the DLC, is Mikola wants to be a god so that Mikola can take over basically the Golden Order, the Erdtree, everything, and create new order that is kind, that is loving, that is not corrupt. And so I read a really good point that's probably why he ended up divesting himself of his love, because so much of the corruption that happens from Marika's reign is because she loved Mesmer too much. It's like, like Mesmer was born with the base serpent inside him, right? So to stop the serpent from killing her child, basically, she plucked out his eye, gave him the Iris of Grace, plopped that into his head, and that kept that at bay. I'm trying to remember exactly how this turns around, but it's like she banishes him to the Shadowlands because he'll be safe there, basically. It's like, as long as he's protected by Grace, he can do stuff for her there. She sends him on a crusade, right? He's against the Hornsent. The entire crusade against the Hornsent is the reason why the Omens exist and why, like, her bloodline was basically cursed. And then everything spiraled from there. So, like, everything that went wrong with Marika's reign was almost because of her love for her own child. Like, in a weird roundabout way. And so I saw someone kind of like piece that together, and they said that's probably why, in order to become a god and make everything right, if you have love, you're going to love something too much, you're going to want to keep something around, you're going to make really bad decisions out of the interest of love. And that's a very common theme in writing.
Yeah, I was about to say.
It's like literally, yeah. So, you know, making bad decisions because of love, name a better trope. And so Mikola was like kind of trying to avoid that by getting rid of like the love and kindness that was within their heart, so they could kind of like start new and start with like just the baseline of like purity and kindness all around, not biased. And I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think my note for this section is, where did I put it? I said, are we just doomed to repeat our parents' failings?
Yeah.
Because I think ultimately, like, what the DLC, and I think why the DLC focuses on Marika's backstory, is it needs us to see the parallel structure and see that, like, Marika's rise to godhood is essentially starts with like the genocide of the people in her town. Like, she starts with good intentions, but if you divest yourself of all of these things, you're only left with half a person in the end, and half a person can't rule a whole empire. In the case of Mikola, he also has to divest just so much of himself. There's a spirit by the One Grace. I don't know if you know, like the little ghosts that are like on the ground.
Yeah. They just like lore dump at you.
Yeah, they lore dump at you.
Yeah.
The one of them that's on the way down to Mikola is like, why would you divest your love? Like, it's the one. Like, how are you going to get
the one
through
thing
this?
You shouldn't get rid of? Like, how are you going to usher in an age of kindness if you don't have love? Is basically like what it's saying, I think.
And so it's, to me, I see that as like the parallel structure between the two of these to say like, Mikola is ultimately just going through the same steps that his mother went through, and he's too blind to see it because he keeps divesting all of these aspects off of himself. And it's going to result in failure in the end anyway.
Well, and I think that's interesting. And it kind of segues to like my big problem with like the lore, which is like the whole Radon thing. And I said we would get back to like Radon and the lore because this doesn't make sense to me. So the reason this doesn't make sense to me is because, so Mikola, the entire thing is like there was some vow that was made. There was some promise. The reason why Radon comes back is because Radon at some point promised to be Mikola's consort if Mikola becomes a god. Mm-hmm. Right? That's the entire point of it. But we only hear that from Mikola's standpoint. We never hear Radon. Radon doesn't utter a single word. We never hear anything from Radon's perspective, whether it's a quote or like dialogue, anything. And like there's a lot of things that don't line up with Radon wanting to be Mikola's consort. Sure. Because Melania is the blade of Mikola. We've heard that 100 times dying to her. But she went off on a war against Radon, right? Basically. Her entire thing was kill Radon. We learned in the DLC that her entire reason for basically going and starting that war against Radon was to kill Radon so that he could go to the Shadow Realm, like, and be with Mikola. Like, that was the entire point, is like, he needs to die so that he can basically cross over and be reborn as Mikola's consort. But Radon fights so hard against that idea. Like, even after he's defeated by Melania, and she, like, it seems like that's what she tells him in the fight, is like, yeah, like, you're basically on your way. Like, you're going to fulfill your vow. Here's this. He holds on for so long. He's just this like shambling corpse of a man who is just like refusing to die. And if he really wanted to be Mikola's consort, why would he not just be like, oh yeah, that's my purpose, I'll just die? Like, why ruin an entire section of like the continent with scarlet rot over a war if your entire purpose was just to die anyways?
And I'm suspicious of that as well, because he's holding back the stars. Mm-hmm. And like, why does he need to do that?
Yeah, like, that's something that was just like not, it's like, is it explained a tiny bit? Not really though, because yeah, why does he hold that as more important than
like fulfilling this vow
king
that
consort?
He has?
So I'm just wondering if like this vow, it seems like this vow between Mikola and Radon was made when they were like probably children, like at least very young, and then like so much time has passed in between that either Radon's views have shifted and he, you know, he's like in cohort with like Rani and, you know, the Age of Stars things, or maybe he's like specifically trying to stop Rani from entering the Age of Star. Like, I don't know. Like, clearly his goals have like shifted from whatever when he promised this vow to Miquella. And I guess my entire point with that is that it seems like Miquella is like just selfish in that regard, where it's like, well, no, you made a promise to me back when we were kids, so fuck you, I'm going to start a war, you're going to die, I'm going to use this other guy's body to resurrect you in, you're going to live in his skin, and then you're going to be my king consort because I said so. And it's like, that's not kindness, that's not, I don't know, this seems to go against everything that Miquella stands for.
Yeah, and I mean, even on that point, right? And I think this goes into a little bit of like the hypocrisy of Miquella. Sort of one of the main ideas we see in the DLC as well is that like all the NPCs are mind controlled.
Yeah.
Even to the extent that we're sort of led to believe, I think, by some of Ansbach's dialogue, that like Mohg might have been mind controlled by Miquella to bring him down into the Mohgwyn dynasty in the first place.
Interesting.
And like the Mohg that we sort of fight and experience during the base game like might not even be who Mohg truly is.
That's just basically like an enchanted version of what he needs to be for whatever Miquella needs him for, right, kind of thing.
So
I guess
there is this like the idea that Miquella is trying to usher in this age of kindness and compassion through mind controlling people and like,
yeah, that seems pretty terrible.
And like taking away their free will is not like a true age of kindness and compassion.
No, that's you know, like every ruler who's like, well, I'm going to be the best, and this is what's best for the people is what's best for me.
Right.
It's like, I say this is best, and so you're going to love it.
Like the parallel we see is like Miquella's rise to godhood through and like using mind control in order to maintain this age of kindness versus Marika's rise to godhood and plucking out the rune of death. Like both of them are acting in what they think is in the best interest of everybody. Marika is sort of saying like, hey, I'm going to separate out the land of shadow so the Hornsent can go die in the land of shadow for all I care. And then the rest of us, we can't die anymore.
Yeah, we're in Valhalla. We're good. Like
Marika's trying to prevent the thing that happened in Shaman Village. Like
right.
She's trying to prevent the thing that happened before from happening again.
Yeah.
And just leads to more problems. Miquella is trying to prevent the thing that happened before and is ultimately leading to more problems.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's good that you like brought up that the NPCs are all mind controlled because yeah, like once there's a certain point when you enter or when you get up to the Shadow Keep where the enchantment breaks, and then all of the NPCs that you've met up to that point who are all like, we come from different backgrounds, like we're different people, we should hate each other, but we're all working together because of kindly Miquella. Yeah. And then like as soon as that enchantment shatters, everyone is at each other's back. And so like that all leads up to that like big NPC fight with Lita where, you know, it's people for and against Miquella. And it's like everyone kind of goes in their own way once they realize that, like once the charm is worn off, once they're just like, oh wait, why am I doing this again? Taking away agency, taking away free will is inherently not kind, you know, obviously.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, there's all that. There was something else I wanted to at least mention in this.
There's the one other thing that I have is like, we were talking about Marika's rise to power. I didn't know this, and this is kind of going off of Miquella entirely.
Yeah.
But something that I didn't know is that I don't know if this is in the base game. Placidusax, the dragon, he was the first Elden Lord. I didn't know that. Like
yeah, because they have the dragon backstory.
Yeah, I don't know if I just missed that in it, but I know that it was fleshed out a lot in the DLC, like with you know that there was a lot of lore about Placidusax and the dragons, like the Civil War. There's a lot of stuff about that in the DLC. I feel like I just missed that entirely in the main game. That like there was an Elden Lord before. Godfrey was technically the first Elden Lord, but or sorry, was like the first Elden Lord with Marika, but then Placidusax was like a dragon Elden Lord, which is interesting.
I think it's the cool like fantasy idea that like the world existed before the story did, it's sort of like the famous Tolkien thing, right? Where like they find the elves, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I was alive at that battle 1,500 years ago."
yeah. But, read the Silmarillion. I was there. Yeah,
yeah, I was in that. So I think that's cool. I think it's a cool thing to sort of, because it helps to set up the timeline. This idea that like the dragons were sort of like the people around before the Golden Order, but like they had their own conflict where both like Baal and Placidusax were at their weakest, and that them being weak is what was the sort of gateway for like Marika to start the Golden Order, because she could sort of take over as like the new Elden Lord. Yeah, it's like all fascinating stuff. The fact that there's like so many layers to this story. And if you could do like a whole podcast about like the Dragon Civil War and talking about all of that.
You could do an entire pod, like we could just do episodes and episodes about just like facets of just little bits of the lore, because the thing is, like, there's so much, and like there's so much that was just added with the DLC. Like the amount of content, again, I said this before, it was staggering. Just the amount that we got, that we learned from the world, the amount of like physical content we got. It's kind of insane. It's pretty on par with like FromSoft DLCs, because I mean, like,
true,
especially with like the first thing that comes to mind is Bloodborne and the Old Hunters DLC, because yeah, sure, you kind of get the gist of what's happening with, the great ones in the main game, but then like the Old Hunters is like, okay, but why is it like this? Like, why does the nightmare exist? Why are we doing this? Like, where do monsters come from? And it kind of gives me that same effect where I feel like in the base game of Elden Ring, I kind of understood the story as much as you can understand the story. And then like this just gave me such like a deep understanding of the world. This felt like, because they allegedly brought in George R. Martin to write for Elden Ring. Allegedly, who knows? But this is kind of what made me feel, that maybe that's actually true, because like there's so much lore that's fleshed out. Like clearly this world is like very lived in, and I think that's what makes it really cool. Like it's what makes me want to dive into it more, is that outside of the game there's so much more that happened that like we'll just never know about. But that's history, right? It's like you can look at a history textbook and be like, oh, this happened in the 1400s, but like I'll never get to experience it.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess two things about that. One, have you ever heard how Miyazaki sort of originally came up with the idea of how he wanted to do like the Dark Souls lore?
Well, it's like because he was talking about, what was it? He was talking about like how you find like manuscripts and stuff, and like that's how we write like history books, is like, oh, we just find like different people's accounts of things and just kind of like piece it together. Or
so I guess the sort of what I had read is, I guess the apocryphal story here goes that like maybe he talked about this in an interview or something, but like
no,
when he
I
was
know exactly
a kid,
what you're talking about. Yes,
when he was a kid, and I guess he was reading like English comics or something, but like he doesn't speak English that well, so he sort of has to like piece together stuff. So yeah,
it's like half understanding a story in another language and then kind of like writing a story in that style.
Yeah, I almost really like the idea that like at the end of the day, Elden Ring as a story is this like old book that like has some pages torn out. Some of them are just like ripped, and it's in a language that you don't know. So you have to like, we just get bits and pieces. And yeah, some of those pages are ripped out. Like ultimately there's going to be some things in Elden Ring that we're never going to get to know because the pages don't exist anymore.
And there's also so many things that are like shrouded because like shrouded in bias, because like who's going to tell the history except for the people who are still alive, right? Like history is written by the victors is the famous quote. And it's like, that's like how much of the lore is actually reliable. Like we were talking about with, what's his name? The Finger Man, Finger Mommy. It's like how much of the lore is kind of like from like someone's lens like that. It's just someone who had an opinion and just had the outreach to be able to get that opinion out.
Yeah, there's two really great sort of dialogue pieces about that. One of them is one of the ghosts that you can talk to gives this great line about the horn scent, where he's like, they weren't saints, they were just on the losing side of a war.
Oh, dang.
Which is just like, it's such a great it's such a great line of dialogue and kind of like a weird position to take, that like just because you were on the losing side of a war doesn't mean you were right.
Yeah.
Which is like interesting just in terms of like America's crusade, and being like, yeah, like playing into the idea that like she was kind of had a just reason for what she was doing in the first place. And the fact that we just get that off of like a random like dude.
Yeah.
And yeah, also the idea that like we're never gonna know because these things took place so far in the past. I just because I'm a school teacher, I was in another teacher's room earlier this year. Students were taking some testing and they were doing a thing where they had to, it was a European history class. They had to vote on who they thought was the most important person that they had learned about in school in their European history class.
Oh, interesting.
And of the choices that they had, I've taken European history previously. I put up the top two choices as Gutenberg, the guy who invented the printing press, and Martin Luther, the guy who started the Protestant Reformation. I'm like, these are two guys who are now like 500 years old, like 500 years dead. And they have such significant impacts on like the world as we experience it today. Like a well-written narrative is going to have that same sort of stuff. Like the Dragon Civil War paving the way for like America's ascension to godhood is like a critically important part of the story that we're honestly just going to never know enough about.
Yep.
To be satisfied.
There's never going to be anything because it's just like all we need to know is what is relevant to America and like what exactly allowed her to start her history. So like we're never going to know any of the other details because it's not her story. And I feel like that's the thing too, is like we're learning America's story. It's like all in all, this is America's story.
Totally.
Everyone else is just a side character. So it's like I feel like that's why there's just so much stuff that we're never going to know about because it's not as relevant to her story. Like,
yeah. And I mean, I like the reframing, and ultimately about America's story, I like the reframing in the DLC of, so now that we sort of understand where she started, where she got to where she went, why we're here in the first place as a character, I think we're ultimately left feeling like America's the antagonist of the story in a loose sense. She's just kind of in the tree and we make our way to her.
Yeah, we came into her home and busted her up, so.
But like, is she the bad guy?
That's the thing about history, though, is like, there are definitively bad guys, but it's like the winners aren't always the good guys, and the losers
aren't always the good guys, but like the losers aren't always the bad guys either.
Yeah, it's like, that's such an interesting way to frame it.
So, because I remember like finishing up the DLC, and as I was chatting with my friends about it, and I was like, okay, so we know like America did this all because her village got slaughtered and put into jars. And I'm like, I don't know if ascending to godhood is a reasonable response to that.
I don't know if becoming a god, taking away the ability to die, and then like breaking the rules of reality when one of your kids ended up accidentally dying. Like, I don't know if that was the right recourse.
Yeah.
I feel like if America was in therapy, maybe some of this stuff wouldn't have happened.
Maybe this wouldn't have happened. But yeah, and then like it really feels like the DLC like recontextualizes like a lot of what we learn in the main game. And like
totally.
We understand like why America plucks out the rune of death. And to me, especially like what we learn about the omens and being like sort of left to wonder, like, is the omen curse the same thing as the horn scent? Like, or are they different things?
And that's the thing that's hard, is that like I think it's one of those things, and I could be entirely wrong about this. I think it's like the horn scent cursed America, that like her offspring would basically like bear the same horns that, gave her PTSD. So I think it's one of those things where it's like, are the omens horn scent? Yes. So it's like, are all omens horn scent? Yes, but not all horn scent are omens. You know what I mean? Well, like, I think it's a Venn diagram a little bit.
And I remember one of the things that's mentioned about the omen is that they don't get returned to the Erdtree. So
Yeah.
like that's kind of that's why they call it the Omen curse, is because they don't get, their soul doesn't get resurrected back into the Erdtree, which makes sense in terms of, now that we understand that like Marika is anti-Hornsent, that essentially like their omens are not welcome back into the grace of the Golden Order.
Yeah.
Because Marika crusaded against them.
Oh, that's such a good point.
But then like you take that idea, and for me that recontextualizes Dung Eater's ending, because he wants to turn everybody into omens. But like, is that a bad thing?
I mean, like the way that he's going about it, yeah. But
well,
I hear what you're saying, though.
He just like, he said he's gonna like curse the next generation, and then their kids will be cursed, and then, but like, they're just getting the Omen curse, which just means that they're not resurrecting back into the Erdtree, which, if you're a Golden Order fundamentalist, is the worst thing ever.
But like, yeah, the worst thing that could happen to you. Yeah. But
like, outside of the context from the Golden Order,
you get to die. It's like, if you die, you die. Like that's so sick. So like,
right. So like, to me, that's, for what I think we had traditionally thought about was the worst ending of the game, because Dung Eater is a crazy character,
is maybe actually just it reintroducing something that is like so base about being a human, is the ability to live a life and die, which Marika specifically got rid of. It's like, yeah, it's like reintroducing just like a fundamental order of life, which is death.
But you also have like the mending rune of death ending, which is different. Like,
yeah,
there's so much to explore.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
One sort of, just because I was thinking about this one as well, just as we were talking, one sort of final point I want to mention is, along with Shaman Village, the one thing that really stood out to me is because it gives you that minor Erdtree spell that's there, but they also have that tree in the village that has the woman in it, or like the statue of the woman.
Right.
I am sort of left to wonder if the Erdtree itself is like an invention of Marika, inspired by this like tradition in the shaman village of like burying people under trees.
Yeah.
And so we loop back around to this like physical versus conceptual idea, where maybe in the shaman village, they like physically planted people under trees so that their like spirit would go into the tree. Thus, in the Golden Order, people literally get returned to the Erdtree and reborn.
That's interesting. And well, we know that like, yeah, that's a good point. We know that Mikola created the Halig tree, which was basically taking an Erdtree seed and then, watering it with his own blood to make the Halig tree, which is
that means.
An insane concept. But like I don't know. I think like my tomatoes would turn out a lot better if I just like used my own blood instead of water. But like, so we know that like Erdtrees can be just like grown. We know that that's a thing. Sure. So yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's just like having the idea. I really like how the idea of like the Erdtree itself being this like conceptual manifestation of like something that happened in Marika's hometown in a like physical metaphorical version, that when she ascends to godhood also is associated with this like conceptual realization of that idea.
Yeah.
It's something I haven't seen people talk about, but like it makes sense in my head, I guess.
Well, I mean, like, and this is a terrible. So I've been reading a lot of Dune, and that just like, I'm reading through Dune Messiah currently, and it's like that really just like reading through Dune Messiah, like you understand like the entire religion and why the religion around Muad'Dib and like the jihad, why it is what it is, why their rituals are the way they are, why they do this. And it's so interesting that like it puts it in such a human way where it's like, well, they like everything started just because Paul wanted things done this way, or the Fremen did things this way. And so like everything around the religion was just like, it's based on old like Fremen myth, or just like things that the Fremen have been doing forever, or that like Paul did. So it's like, it's just like putting it in the context of like, if you put the Golden Order into context of religion, it's like, yeah, I guess like, of course, like the entire religion was based around what Marika's childhood was, or like what Marika's life was growing up, because like of course she's gonna like deify these like potentially like meaningless little rituals that they do. Like it's these things that like the people in the shaman village maybe just did, who knows why, like maybe they don't even know why they're doing it, and she's just like, well, no, this is a central part of my childhood, this is important to me, so this is my religion now, I guess.
Sure, yeah. And it's sort of, it just sort of conceptualizes as she rises to godhood.
Yeah.
It's that manifestation. You gotta so Dune is my favorite series.
Oh man. Oh, don't even, we can't get started on
no,
Dune.
we can't get started. But
oh my god.
You do have to let me know. Are you how much of Dune are you planning on reading? Are you planning on just kind of like chunking through?
So I am going to read through the first 4 books. So I'll read through God Emperor. So I've got I'm almost done Messiah, about to read Children of Dune. I'll read through God Emperor. As far as I've read, that seems like it's like the end of like that storyline.
That's
right?
Where I
everything
stopped.
else is kind of well, a lot of that past that point is like Brian Herbert, which isn't, you know, so whether there's a lot of discussion about whether or not that's like true canon or not. But yeah, so that's that. Yeah,
you just got to let me know. God Emperor of Dune is probably one of my favorite books of all time.
That's interesting. Okay.
So you got to let me know when you get to God Emperor and when you finish up God Emperor, because we can talk about that too.
I'm 100% down. And on that note, I think we just did an episode.
Yeah, so. I think we're nearly on 2 hours. So.
Yeah, realistically, I'm probably gonna. Yeah, this might be 2 episodes. We'll see how I feel when it's all. So, that went on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, that went on for so much longer than I thought we could possibly talk about. Like a couple lore points. We ended up basically on an hour of just like 2 points, really.
And there's so much more to talk about.
And that's the thing, is that like I think that just speaks to the depth of the lore, and like even though it's one of those games that like you can look at and say it doesn't tell a story, because all the stories are just like one quote in like one sentence in an item description, but there's just so much to that. Like the world is so rich and like interesting that even though the lore isn't presented in a way that is like, you know, like a AAA game, it's not shoving it down your throat, it's not telling you a story, it's letting you just learn about the world. It's like reading a history textbook. Like it's very fascinating. I think it's
absolutely interesting. Yeah, so, I'm totally on the same page.
So on that note, go listen to Overthinking Games. I absolutely adore that podcast, and you guys should too.
Thank you again.
And yeah, I guess we did a thing. So
cut.
Woohoo! And cut. Yeah, that's pretty much it. How do you even I don't even know how that ends.